now recorded. So hello everybody also from my side. So we have been talking with with May-Lin quite a bit of the agenda in the very last days, because quite a lot is happening around digital cooperation and in both of our lives. So Minnie will probably tell what she has been up to the past months in her fascinating sort of position in Berlin, and I will perhaps also talk a little bit what I have been up to, or what has been happening in sort of in the digital cooperation area that has occupied me for quite a bit. So as we all know, the UN digital cooperation has also activated, calling also for contributions from the member states, and we are, but not only. So we are also currently thinking on how we could streamline some of what we do here, but also in the EU with a sort of a wider global sphere, and of course relatedly in Europe we have the global digital gateway discussions going on, and how to connect the dots there. But also quite a bit is going to happen in June, and many of the people that are in the call today also know it, and probably know more about the events that events than I do. Next week there are two very important events going on. The VCs forum is again gathering. It's ending next week, and I believe after 2 years, or maybe even 3, but I think after 2 years we will be able to gather again physically. And then there is also the Digital Public Goods Alliance and the Digital Public Goods Charter process, getting into some of I wouldn't say the middle point, but at least to some end of some process and the beginning of a new process. So I am very much also looking forward to the event we will have in Oslo, and Liv and also Kate that are here in the call today have been probably very busy over the past months preparing for it, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to be a great event. I would even say I'm sure it's going to be a blast. And ITU, of course, will also commence the development focused telecommunication event in Kigali, where several countries are also making, but not only countries, but the partners in digital cooperation are going to make their pledges. Surely quite a bit is going to be related on digitalization efforts in Ukraine, but also several other interesting pledges are going to be made there, including around digital public goods and also GovStack. So it will be a busy June. So I understand that we have some changes compared to the agenda that you have here. We will have Alex from ITU joining us a little bit later. So we have a little bit swapped the order, and we will actually first have Liv Marte Nordhaug from NORAD, and she's working as a head of digitalization and strategy in NORAD, but Liv, correct me if I'm wrong. But we'll tell more about the Digital Public Goods Alliance and Digital Public Goods Charter mobilization process, and we will follow up with this later in our discussions today around different aspects. But I wouldn't like to take more. So Liv, if you're already here. I think I saw you in the list.
Yes, I'm here, Nele.
So,
if you're able to hear me, I don't know if you're able to see me as well. I think I'm on video.
Yes,
I don't see. Unfortunately, I don't see you. I don't know about the others, but
no, we see her, we hear her both.
I'm connected on 2 devices, one for speaking and one for my video. That's probably why.
We hear you,
So,
but don't see you.
Some of you see me.
Some of see you, yeah.
we will see soon, but would be nice to see you also here.
Yeah,
but
no,
okay.
I think I'm on one of the icons. If you scroll across the different icons, you probably find me on one of them, and you find my voice on the other.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
I can see you.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm a little bit technologically challenged, so.
So thank you for that.
Also, if you're on the phone, you don't get to see the person till they speak.
Right. If you pin, I will. I think I put her into the spotlight. So please go ahead, Liv. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. I will put Nele back on the spot by saying that I haven't had an immense amount of time to prepare this presentation, so bear with me if it comes across as not entirely polished. But I do have some slides. I don't know if you normally show slides, or I can just go without them. It's a bit up to you what you prefer.
Yes, please share slides. That's good.
Yeah. So if I can share. Why don't I share this one? And hopefully, are you able to see something?
Yes.
So yeah, so basically, and let me know if the slides are not moving. I hear some background noise here, but that's not me, I hope. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so basically, very quickly, I just wanted to touch upon the definition of digital public goods. And please let me know again if my slides are not moving. To me, they are moving. So it's a definition that comes from the UN Secretary General and was laid out in his roadmap for digital cooperation that he published in June 2020. And his roadmap followed up a high-level panel on digital cooperation from that delivered its report in 2019 and was really tasked into looking at how international digital cooperation could be enhanced. And digital public goods are basically, there's certain like key components. So you can think of it as a subset of open source technologies or open source digital solutions. And they can be both open source software, open content, open data, AI models, and standards. I think it's important to mention that it's not only software. But the key characteristics is that in addition to being an open source, they advance the sustainable development goals. So there should be some kind of relevance to the SDGs, and also some safeguards related to how they are designed to not do harm, meaning particularly around privacy and user security. And the Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat, which I co-lead, and Nele is also correct that I'm co-hosted by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. So I'm hosted here, and then the Secretariat is co-hosted by Norway, together with UNDP and UNICEF as other co-hosts. And I am one of the co-leads. And the registry stewards the Digital Public Goods Standard as an open standard that it's possible to contribute to. And we also maintain a registry of digital solutions that have been screened against that standard. And these numbers are obviously changing because there are more and more digital solutions being nominated. We're thrilled to see that. And other stakeholders are also implementing and pulling from this registry. So DIAL, for instance, is pulling from this registry into the catalog of digital solutions. And that's exactly the intention, that this is in itself something that can be reused by others. The alliance currently has, we're growing so quickly that the numbers of membership, I sort of struggle myself to keep track with them. And there are some that are in process of being announced. So I just have to make sure that I don't pre-announce anyone. There are more joining very soon. We will very soon be around 20 members, I'll say that much. But these are our current confirmed members. And we're thrilled, of course, to have Estonia as one of the members. And the co-founders of the alliance are Norway, Sierra Leone, UNICEF, and iSpirit, the think tank that has been very, very centrally involved in the India stack. And we also have other very inspirational Indian stakeholders like the Eagle Foundation and many others that you will recognize that they're doing. Each and everyone is doing very valuable things in the area of digital public goods. And that's really what membership is about. It's an activity-based alliance, meaning that all members are doing significant activities of relevance to the strategy of the alliance. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's just to explain how we're working. The Secretariat, I would say, does a tiny part of the totality of the alliance, and that's the entire point. It's a distributed alliance. So we have core activities that the Secretariat drives to sort of keep the ecosystem together. So I mentioned the standard, the registry. We also convene communities of practice around urgent development needs and challenges, where we bring together different experts that contribute. So we have done that for financial inclusion. We've had one on GovStack, or we have one on GovStack. We're starting one on food security. We've had on immunization delivery solutions. And we're also just starting one on information pollution as to exemplify what that means. But I would say that, and then there are coordinated activities that where the Secretariat works closely with one or more members to do specifically strategic activities. But most of the value add is in the aligned activities, meaning that those are independent activities that members, and I would also say other stakeholders, because it's not like there is not anyone outside of the membership that's doing value add. But aligned activities are done in advancement of the overall strategy and strategic objectives of the alliance. And a lot is happening here. And I would want to emphasize that. So this is really, really where so much of all of the great digital public goods work that we're seeing now is happening. And I really hope that it will continue that way. So we do aim to remain a distributed alliance and hopefully empower members to do more and have more members come in and do more. The DPG charter, and I saw that Kate is on here. So and I hadn't prepared to provide a big talk like at all on that. So I can just mention that the Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat, we are co-coordinating the Digital Public Goods Charter process together with DIAL. So Kate, feel free to jump in after me and also add to what I'm saying now. It is really a coordinated mobilization effort to advance particularly the agenda around ensuring all countries are able to build out safe, trusted and inclusive digital public infrastructure. And digital public infrastructure is referring to these particularly foundational, cross-sectorally enabling systems. So typically ID systems, payment platforms, data exchange systems, and also some solutions that are very important for delivering on sector-specific use cases. But it's really the foundations we're talking about. And there is a great alignment now that digital public goods, so basically these open source, state-of-the-art solutions that exist, can really help accelerate the agenda of supporting countries to build out digital public infrastructure, but in combination, of course, with regulatory reform, technical assistance, support for long-term country implementation, which is often where the greatest costs are. And the DPG charter process is really a mobilization effort, a concerted effort to mobilize more both financing, but also technology sharing and alignment, coordination, and collaboration around this agenda over the next 12 plus months. And the aim is that this the totality here will be handed over and culminate at the 2023 Summit for the Future. So basically the UN General Assembly next year. So as Nele mentioned, we're yes, we are very busy, and the reason for that is we're hosting a number of things. So the DPGA first physical members meetings are taking place next week from Wednesday to Friday. But in addition, we have we're also hosting we're co-organizing a high-level virtual event that is sort of kickstarting the first pledges for this charter process. And that high-level virtual event is co-organized by the government of Norway and the government of Sierra Leone and UNDP. And the DPGA Secretariat is involved in helping co-organize everything. So here we are having Bill Gates and Nandan Nilekani participate as key philanthropic stakeholders. We have a number of countries, including India, Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, Bangladesh, Estonia, Sweden, Germany, and I didn't mention all. I just mentioned some now. And also we have UNICEF and UNDP representing the UN system. So I'm really excited about this event, which is the recording of it. It's not open to the general public, but the recording of it will be shared afterwards. The whole idea is that what happens there will snowball, what we call snowball, basically that it will be built upon in future events, including at the UN General Assembly, and I think also directly afterwards in Kigali, which Kate can probably speak to, because Kigali happens right after the Oslo meetings. So I think that's it for me for now. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions, and just also really to encourage you to take part in this mobilization effort, because there's a lot that can be done. One thing is financing, obviously, and I know you will be discussing, I saw financing someplace in the agenda, Nele. So, you know, yes. And I think it's directly financing of digital public goods you will be talking about. So that's obviously at the core of this agenda. But I would also like to emphasize sharing technologies, both sharing, but also implementation of technologies and being part of sharing learnings around implementing digital public goods, alignment by designing with the DPG standard, having that as you know, a standard or something that is baked into other things that are funded and supported. So there are many, many ways to drive alignment here. Policy reform, ensuring that procurement processes can also support open source, and not the least technical assistance and capacity building to benefit from, or to be able to leverage the opportunity that is in open source and digital public goods. So, and I think Estonia, given that Nele, you are the one opening this, Estonia is doing a lot of great stuff, particularly exactly around that. I think you would be one example of someone who could provide excellent examples of what it means to support other countries to implement digital public goods, for instance, through what you've been working with Ukraine on for many years. So I think I'll stop there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Liv. Kate, would you like to step in? I noticed also you were active in the chat, so maybe.
Sure. No, and I want to
first, and then if somebody has a comment or question.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Liv. So I just also want to knit together some of those conversations, because so in March, we presented on the charter process overall. What Liv is outlining is sort of DPGA's work overall, and then how the charter fits in and folds in. And then I want to tie this to Prashant's presentation in just a few minutes. So as we all know, there's many individual efforts that are advancing digital transformation, digital public goods, and that we are all a part of that. And as the spirit of this community is really about how we align and move those efforts together. So when we were approached with DPGA about co-leading this effort on the charter, we became very interested and engaged about how we make all of those connections and thread these efforts together so that they fit. So the work some of the ideas and some of the push around the charter actually came out of the presentation that Prashant is about to show you, which many people haven't seen, which is around what will it take, what are the common problems in digital public goods, what is it going to take to finance them, and what are areas around that. Then a group basically came together and said, how do we mobilize this high level advocacy and political commitment, which is framed as the Charter for Digital Public Goods and is above both of our organizations, DIAL, DPGA, et cetera, but is really sort of trying to kickstart a global movement to get high level political commitment to then mobilize financing. So it's a nesting together all of these. It also ties into and deliberately builds upon, as Liv said, what is taking place within the UN system around the Global Digital Compact, the Summit for the Futures, and we're deliberately tying it and listing it and nesting it to the ITU's Partner to Connect initiative, so that these things don't become, here's a pledging process over here, here's a pledging process over here, and these are all separate and scattered. We're deliberately coordinating and connecting with all to try and mobilize us all moving in the same direction, even if we have different people doing aspects of it. So I just wanted to add that. And then I also did put in the chat, as we leave sort of the Oslo event, which will have some early pledges, but we'll really begin to kickstart this movement and kind of the publicity effort sort of around the Charter for Digital Public Goods. We're really going into a consultation period that will tie to this year's UNGA. And we're deliberately reaching out to stakeholders such as yourselves and conveners to begin convening some of the groups that are really digging into different aspects and reach different communities around digital public goods, so that we can gather that input together and sort of put out like, here's a statement from the world, not just from DIAL, not just from DPGA, but from the world about what needs to happen. So we really invite you into this process with us. And we're happy to also just come back and do sort of a like what's happening next on the charter itself as kind of an update to the presentation I gave in March.
Thank you, Kate. Some of the challenges around digital public goods, but not limited to digital public goods, have been pointed out here, and we have Prashant also coming, but to introduce the financing the financing challenge. But I was wondering whether anybody has a question for to Liv.
Sure.
Or we are continuing.
So I'll go ahead and just a remark and a question or a comment. One is thank you to, I'm happy to see standards being mentioned as one of the digital public goods. Glad to see that, and therefore I'm hoping that organizations which deals in those would become part of the alliance, organizations like IEEE and ISO, to name a few. The one which I didn't see specifically mentioned, one aspect I'm sure is part of it, is the whole workforce development, the emerging techs, and therefore the workforce development in that space. So I thought I'll just comment on that. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer, Nele, or should I?
Please.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I think, I mean, if by workforce development, I mentioned capacity building, and I think the capacity to utilize these digital solutions and to create locally is of the essence, and it's definitely something we are mobilizing for as part of what the DPGA is doing, and also as part of this charter effort. But it's not part of the definition, so to speak, of digital public good. But I completely agree with you that it's essential, and that we will not be able to leverage the benefits of open source if we don't do it alongside focusing on capacity.
Yeah, especially the skills gap, which is now becoming a key issue all over the globe, will bite you later on, if that's not looked into.
Agree.
Thank you, and I think Kumiko wanted also to give an update.
Thank you, colleagues. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, my internet's a bit patchy, so I'm not sure if you can hear the audio okay. I know the video isn't working today, unfortunately. But I'm standing in for Rob today. I'm working closely with him in UNDP's Chief Digital Office on the implementation of the new digital strategy. And just to build on this wonderful presentation on the DPG and what Kate's been talking about with regards to DPG and the Charter. So within the context of the DPG Charter, as UNDP, we're committing to developing and scaling digital public goods. And we've actually made a couple of sort of key commitments, targets, pledges that we can share. So to share a couple of them, first, the UNDP is pledging to support 50 governments to commit to the Global Charter for digital inclusion outcomes by 2025. And this can be with regards to infrastructure, or it can be within thematic areas such as health, education, justice. UNDP is also pledging to support 10 countries with catalytic technical assistance focused on program initiation, policy support, program management, etc. for digital public goods. And this is a target that we have for 2023. And I guess more immediately, we've committed to developing 5 open source, inclusive, free digital public goods to promote development during 2022. And in fact, we've just had our AI-enabled misinformation tool called iVerify registered as a digital public good in the DPG registry, which we're extremely excited about. And I'll share a link about the press release afterwards. And iVerify, for those who are not familiar, is an automated fact-checking tool, which is developed to help combat spread of false narratives during elections. It's been piloted in Zambia and Honduras, and we're now exploring implementation in, I believe, Kenya and Liberia. So I think that's sort of a quick update from our side with regards to DPG. Mei-Ling, I'm not sure if you would like me to continue on some of the other topics.
No, this is fine, Kumiko. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Back
you.
to you, Nelly.
Thank you. So we are looking forward to the next week, or at least I am, and we will have an update probably during our next meeting. But Prashant, you have been, I believe, already waiting to talk more about the challenge of funding of the public goods. So if you are ready, we are definitely ready. And thank you, Liv, and for coming actually in such a short notice, and Kate for your comments.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cool.
So Prashant, are you here? Great.
Yeah, I'm here. Are you able to hear me? Is this okay? I'm sorry, it's a bit dark. I'm sitting on the floor in a hospital. It's actually the second time that I've ended up here at the same time as this meeting. I was scheduled to come last time and speak, so I figured it would be bad form to cancel again. So just let me know if it doesn't work. I realize we're a few minutes behind time, so I will dispense with introducing myself and go straight into what we did. And hopefully try and leave some time for questions, right? So the background to this work, as I think Kate and Liv and others may have already mentioned, is that I think at the beginning of 2021, we were kind of, I guess, hired or commissioned to do a bit of a study on the state of financing for DPGs, and what are the kind of, at the highest level, what are the challenges, and how do we want the ecosystem of donor financing to shift, or what are opportunities for it to shift. And we focused very much on let's say sovereign donors and aid from governments, as opposed to the broader landscape of foundations or companies or corporations that are also investing behind these goods, right? So let's say we looked at the aid ecosystem as opposed to all the monies that were flowing into the space. And I also want to preface that this was not majorly driven by primary research, right? So the idea was that we had a set of donors in the room, Liv, people from some other like donors, and we basically got input from them and also spoke to a set of other actors who had done various studies on the space, right? So I do not want to, so our role there was to kind of bring everything together and assess it as opposed to try and this is not based on like, let's say, massive underlying research. Okay, with that, I'll get into what we found and hopefully, yeah, I'll stop at the end for questions. I think it'll just be easier. Okay, so I won't speak too much about the kind of value to digital public goods. I think they've been set up quite well. I think the context we had started in was to say that, you know, at the beginning of last year, there was also there was this understanding that, you know, we have not gotten far enough in terms of digital public infrastructure in countries. And the specific question we were asking was around the funding ecosystem for DPGs and how DPGs can be used for creating digital public infrastructure in countries, right? And I think the state we were coming from is that while there was emerging knowledge and you know, at the same time, there was quite a lot of, I would say, there was evidence that countries and governments that wanted to set up digital public infrastructure were kind of, this was growing, right? There was demand for this. And, you know, from the main, let's say the coalitions or organizations that were supporting some of these goods, and we were looking specifically at health, not really a digital public infrastructure, but a sector, and foundational ID and payments, which are considered digital public infrastructure. We were looking at these and saying, you know, where is the demand? And there was evidence of quite a lot of demand, right? And then the question was, how are they being supported? How are they being funded? What's with the ecosystem? And I think across the space, basically what came out or what we understood was that despite quite a lot of interest in you know, setting up, strengthening, advancing digital public infrastructure in countries, this adoption of infrastructure is kind of held back by a few things. And we broke this down into kind of two areas, right? So looking at the countries itself where implementation has to happen. And I think somebody was talking about just a few minutes back about workforce. And you know, I think the first thing that we came to was that there's kind of a challenge in the capacity and capability of governments and governance structures to kind of to firstly kind of imagine the DPI ecosystem in that country and then start to design and implement these, right? And, you know, not all countries are starting at the same place. Some were better equipped than others to do this. I think the second was, while intuitively there was an interest in these infrastructures, most stakeholders in countries were not, like, stakeholders in countries are not necessarily all aligned. It was unclear who was to do this. Where does it fall in the kind of government or national stakeholder ecosystem? Whose responsibility is it to do this, to implement them, and, you know, how do you go about it? And there was quite a lot of, I guess, work needed at the country level to get people all lined up on what to do. That naturally translated to the fact that the kind of regulatory environment that supports these DPIs wasn't exactly, like, had gaps in many countries, not just in terms of the knowledge that something needs to change, but how to change it and what is the gold standard, right? And, you know, this came up very much, for instance, we talked about, like I was talking about payments earlier and saying, you know, how do payment regulations or payment network regulations need to change to allow for these DPIs to exist or whatever, right? Like various questions like this. And then finally, for some countries at least, the very funding needed to build and maintain these DPIs was a challenge, right? Especially when you come to national scale systems like ID and payments, that these could prove to be fairly expensive and not necessarily high up on the priority list of ministries and how to allocate funding. And then the other area that we were looking at was the kind of global ecosystem, to say that if you look at the ecosystem of digital public goods, partly there's a challenge around the kind of the trust and the sustainability of these goods. So lots of digital public goods were supported by either previous projects, universities, loose groups and coalitions of programmers, let's say, for lack of a better word. And, you know, there wasn't trust from countries to say, would these products continue to be supported, continue to be developed? Can we base our national infrastructure on these digital public goods, at least in some cases, right? In country and nationally, there's a challenge around the ecosystem of vendors and partners, typically private sector, who could help support these implementations. I think there was more of an ecosystem for proprietary goods, proprietary products that could be used for infrastructure, but not necessarily so much for DPGs. The fact that these solutions needed quite a lot of customization, but if you are, they're open source and supported by a coalition of some kind, not necessarily that they had the capacity to do this for countries, right? And then finally, I think there was something around the evidence and experience of countries around DPIs, right? And the fact that there were only so many examples that people could point to saying, look, here's a successful example. For instance, Estonia's often quoted here, but there wasn't a very long list, right? So where to point to say this is super important. This is the kind of, we haven't yet come to financing, but to say that this is the context, if you were to translate this, what it came down to was that interventions or support was needed across this kind of ecosystem and value chain of putting DPGs into place, both globally. So thinking about the goods themselves, the advocacy and demand for them, the research that goes into DPIs and the norms and standards, already again referred to here, behind digital public goods. And these could be sorted or solved for at a regional or global level. And then coming down to countries itself, the work needed to come up with a kind of plan or vision or strategy for the country to design said DPIs and then to actually deploy and invest in them, right? So there was, I would say, interventions or support needed across this full ecosystem in various ways. And what it came down to, if you looked at the ecosystem of the kind of the development actor landscape, or like many of the folks in this room, there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things about this, right? Like this, I think access to support meant that there was a lot going on, but somehow this wasn't necessarily having the desired impact, right? There continued to be a massive gap in financing. I won't go into the exact numbers, but let's say it's at a global scale, this was in the order of billions. To say if you wanted every country, every LMIC, for instance, to have this kind of core ID and payments DPIs, that would mean quite a lot of outlay. Almost all of this cost is associated with in-country expenses, like the actual implementation of this infrastructure, maintaining of it, the rollout of it, the workforce that supports these DPIs and makes them operate. And while of course there's then there's the immediate assumption there is that the domestic resources will pay for this. There is a role that international financing will have, right? At least to kickstart this process, to support the global elements of what we were talking about, and in some countries and in some areas to actually directly support the implementation in countries. And that then brings us to, I guess, the question at hand, right? So what is the challenge in financing these? And from a donor point of view, if you looked at this ecosystem, basically we said that we found that there were kind of 4 big issues. One was that there's just a lot of different initiatives, a lot of different products and players that you could fund. So if I was a donor looking to fund, I don't know, imagine a DPI, or sorry, a digital public good in health, there was a multitude of players and actors that I could choose to support, or initiatives that I could choose to support. Similarly, this was split up across different sectors, different actors. There's quite a lot of fragmentation there. We talked earlier about the kind of lack of evidence. So from looking at the kind of return on investment or value from the investment I would make into a digital public good or the infrastructure, in some areas at least, while intuitive, if it doesn't have the long track record and the metrics to say, okay, fine, this is a good investment. Donors also saw that there's quite a lot of risks involved in investing, to say that because a lot of these projects either were not just because of the kind of size and potential risk of the project itself not necessarily continuing, because maybe they were pilots, maybe they were set up in a very specific context, but were no longer needed, but also at the national scale, thinking about the kind of socio-political risks of setting up these kind of ecosystems, right? Like, are is sufficient data privacy measures in place? Is security of this well managed? Like, what impact will this have if not executed well? Is a risk that donors saw. And then finally, we maybe very relevant in this kind of cross-cutting horizontal ecosystem challenge is that most donors operate, like budgets and teams operated and thought about this as as sectors. So maybe they looked at health, or maybe they looked at agriculture, or maybe they looked at economic development, and it was unclear where these foundational horizontal systems fit, right? And so who should fund them, who supports them, and what happens. Yeah, and this is these are some of the reasons why they were held back from financing, and that caused basically a problem further downstream, right? In the in the adoption of these products by countries, effectively because of increasing transaction cost, forcing everybody to spread their efforts because of the fragmented ecosystem, just sort of limited coordination at the country level. So not just in the actor ecosystem, but in the initiatives and efforts that countries were doing. And then finally, I mean, this all came down to then if an LMIC had to then choose between a digital public good as the underlying solution for infrastructure that we're going to set up versus, I don't know, paying agency X to just come in and set up the whole thing. There was let's say, a perceived lack of confidence in these public goods, right? And at the time we were discussing, or the solution that we were coming to, which was to say, is there a world where we could pool some of the efforts of financing and fund these products in a collective manner across donors? And the suggestion we had come to then was to say that there's 3 areas where you want funding. And if we could pool funding from donors, we would want to fund strengthening a portfolio of digital public goods. So across a set of core services or spots, let's say, supporting a set of these digital public goods so that countries that want to adopt them can feel confident that they will be supported, they'll be funded, these will continue to be developed over time. The second was to say we the TA and capacity building support to countries significantly, right, to help them set up these national strategies and then to design products. And finally, from this question of evidence, impact, and de-risking, really looking at saying, do we want to put or collect donor support together behind a set of countries, right? In a way that would be, in some way, let's call them pathfinders, or countries that were already going down the path of investing in DPIs themselves, and that we would collect and put support behind them to make them in some way a the positive examples that we could all point to, right? The here's where it has worked in this context, go look at it example. I'll stop there. I think that was that was maybe quite a bit. I'm sorry for running through it, but I wanted to save some time for your questions. So back to the crowd.
Yeah, thank you, Prashant. I think it was excellent, and I'm also glad that you pointed out to the rather low number of digital public goods that actually Estonia offers, and it's actually quite much related to financing, because keeping a digital public good, alive in compliance with all the standards, technological developments is actually quite expensive. So that's why we have also coupled up with Finland and Iceland. So some of the digital public goods we are actually supporting together with them to make it even possible. But I don't want to take away from actually the experts that we have here today, and I'm sure that David Rhew from Microsoft will have also some ideas and comments on what you just discussed and suggested. But before we go to David, I wanted to ask quickly from Alex Wong, who has joined us, to shortly provide an overview of the partner to connect activities and what is also planned perhaps for the event in Kigali, and then we come back to David, but maybe somebody has a question from Prashant at this moment also, because I don't know, Prashant, how long can you stay at the hospital floor? So so maybe we can take some questions to Prashant if we have.
May I? Excuse me.
Yes, please.
I have some time.
I'd like to ask a question related to how this effort relates to other funding sources like the regional development banks, the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and so on. Because a lot of the resources for digital transformation at the country level are dependent on financing beside the private sector financing from the multilateral development banks. So I was just curious, I don't see any mention of regional development banks or the World Bank or IFC. Is that intentional? This is really more of the UN type umbrella, or is it something that need to be invested in to make sure that they also are part of the solution rather than part of the problem?
Sorry,
Prashant.
yeah, I'm Prashant here. Something happened to my internet, so I had to turn off video. But actually, we ended up speaking to some of the regional development banks just to kind of react to this. I think we didn't explicitly pick who or what in terms of donors need to be in the solution. Or like what we were pointing to was the fact that they're already making a lot of investments, typically, as part of larger umbrella investments in these topics. And the question was more about saying that we probably want them all to be better coordinated. And one way to do that is to coordinate at the level of simply pooling the funding. But to kind of maybe answer one of the kind of sub questions I think I heard, I feel like there is a role there, and it's not really only limited to the UN or let's say more global bodies, right? I'm not sure if that helps.
Nele, do you mind if I add to that? So your question's excellent. So the Charter for Digital Public Goods, which was then formed basically to kind of kickstart this afterwards, and this process will run through 2023. Right. So again, I said, it's just getting announced sort of publicly now to kind of mobilize this financing with some early pledges. And then the consultations will be taking place for the next 4 to 5 months that will work with multiple groups. And then and that's all types of groups, banks, civil society, private sector, globally, right? So this is not a sort of limited effort to any one thing. This is a catalytic movement to get everybody and mobilized and moving in the same direction. It was not limited to any one thing deliberate or any one group deliberately. This is just sort of the early kickoff stages of it. And then I'd say engaged in it and already briefed and sort of involved in it is very deliberately the World Bank. We have not yet gone out to the regional banks, but we'll absolutely have it. And exactly as you said, a lot of it kind of goes into, Prashant, if you could put back up like your second to last slide, which is essentially the areas, it's kind of divided in different ways. So who funds the kind of development of individual DPGs is sort of one group. And that's, sorry, it was the last slide. It was the slide that you started on, Prashant, not this one. The last one that had this one, exactly. So this strengthening the portfolio tends to be kind of one group. Then other groups, oftentimes donors are doing sort of TA and capacity building, but then some of that is sort of woven into sort of bank lending and financing. And then implementation is a different pot. This was trying to say, here's the money. If you're contributing to one of these 3 things, how do you mobilize it? So the efforts that are being mobilized on June 1st is kind of starting with, here's the donor multilateral system. So EU, one of the questions is, how is the EU engaged and other groups? Starting there, as well as the banks. So like KfW, if, for example, is deeply engaged. Then moving to the next part, which is how do you then get everyone sort of aligned around who's funding what, and then making sure that that takes place. But we're sort of in the early days of that. That helps. It is deeply engaged. The second thing I would say is, I'm not sure if your group has had anyone from co-develop. Alongside this, we're also looking to mobilize money from private sector, sort of high net worth individuals So there will also be attached to the giving pledge, mobilizing money around that for exactly the same things, to try and drive more financing into this. It's sort of a pooled financing vehicle. And where that money sits is still very much in question, but likely or could potentially end up being at the World Bank.
I'm only mentioning this not because of the pure funding benefit of it, but because often the practices of regional development banks, and particularly the World Bank, which I'm more familiar with, can actually impede the development of an open source system. Procurement procedures, all kind of regulation and so on, can ultimately make it difficult to have a viable open public goods ecosystem type. And because of that, engagement of these organizations may be useful to be able to at least harmonize or make sure that they can benefit or leverage or contribute beyond funding to also harmonizing policies and standards. That's my main concern really in this area. Just for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Prashant, for taking the time in these difficult circumstances and with apparently a poor internet in Germany. So I hope it will get better. But I'm wondering whether Alex, now are you ready to step in?
Hello,
Oh,
everyone.
thank you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you as well. Sorry to
I
be
was
late
mentioning,
earlier.
yeah,
Yes.
I was mentioning some of the events that are planned also in the Partner to Connect framework, but please.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I'll start by, I'm going to keep this brief because I know some of you have seen Partner to Connect before, but it's more of an update. But it's a reminder, as we are part of the UN, everyone is invited and there's no cost to attend. You just got to pay for your own travel and accommodations, and we can still take you to come. So I'll just remind everybody that PTC is on the occasion of our broader World Telecom Development Conference, which is our big every 4-year conference for the Development Bureau, where we basically get our strategy and mandate from the member states for the next 4 years. Our theme, connecting the unconnected to achieve sustainable development. This is all the sort of usual UN ITU business that's going to come out of this. So there will be a Kigali declaration, as in typical UN fashion, which will outline what our mandate is. PTC is also part of this broader sequence of activities happening, which some of you are aware of, but we are starting with this youth summit. We have over 500 people registered for that now, primarily youth. Then we have, of course, the WTDC beginning June 6 to 16, of which nestled in there is Partner to Connect Roundtable, which I'll talk about in a moment. We'll also have a Network of Women program, a walkathon, and there's all sorts of things happening. So you're all welcome to come. PTC itself, I think many of you have seen the background on PTC, but it's essentially a platform we created at the ITU to basically mobilize pledges for meaningful connectivity and digital transformation. We work very closely with the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, who is usually on these calls, working in coordination with the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, alignment with WSIS and SDGs, et cetera. We also, as many of you have seen, created through the leadership of our focus area leaders and the working groups, over 200 organizations, this action framework, of which we are asking people to pledge against these 4 focus areas. And here's our leaders. And I always we have Kate, happy smiling Kate on the far right. She's been a focus area leader, of course, on building digital ecosystems, and many other familiar faces I'm sure that you have seen. So as of this morning, we've got 171 pledges received to date. So that's quite exciting. Total cumulative financial value of 3.1 billion, and cumulative, not unique, 3.1 billion people targeted. And we heard a bit of a preview of UNDP. I think that's one of your pledges that's going to be made, I understand, as well, because Robert Opp will be in Kigali. So in the Kigali conference, or in the PDC conference itself, which runs from 7th to 9th, I'll just go skip to the grid. So here's what we're doing is we're having these high-level panels where both basically leaders from government, business, civil society, and right now it's predominantly government. Every panel probably has 9 or 10 speakers, and they're mainly at the minister, deputy minister of ICT, and the chief regulatory or head of regulatory authority level. And we have the odd sprinkle business and civil society leaders. So Kate, I know you're planning to be there. And so we'll hope to see you there. And then interestingly here for the group, we have these little spotlights where we're going to feature a segment tied to the Transforming Education Summit. We're going to have hopefully Minister David Segi join together with Fayaz King from UNICEF. Then we have Spotlight 2 is tied to the Doha Program of Action. So that's the LDC action plan. And we'll have the acting head of the OHRLS, Heidi Schroeder-Fox, will be there in person. The third spotlight's on investing. The fourth one tied to the Global Digital Compact. So Yu Ping will be joining us in Kigali from the Office of the Tech Envoy, and the ASG will join virtually. And then we have on Spotlight 5, I'm not going to get into this one, but it's a special pledging session tied to rebuilding Ukraine. And that's a result of an actual resolution that was passed at the IQ Council. So that is the program. After PDC, after WTDC, we're going to continue to play a coordinating role to track and monitor the pledges. Kate, of course, has made a pledge on behalf of the coalition on the DPG Alliance already. I should have mentioned that earlier. We'll keep the platform open for more pledges and periodic reporting updates and events on a minimum, and already thinking of doing something at the UNGA as a side event. So we'll come back to you with this group with more details on that. So I will stop there as a really quick run through of where we are. So super exciting, and hopefully we're going to get like dozens and dozens of more pledges at the PDC roundtable. And that's the whole idea, that every one of the speakers is supposed to be announcing a pledge. So we'll see how that goes. That's it. I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Does anybody want to step in here? It may be actually quite confusing. So there are a lot of different events taking place, and quite a bit also on digital public goods and digital public goods sort of infrastructure. So does anybody want to?
I'll send Nele, I'll send the broader PowerPoint, which has all the slides and people can look through. But I think the key here is if anyone has nothing to do in Kigali in 2 weeks, shoot me an email and I'm happy to forward you details and how to register. I mean, you can just go on our website as well. But yeah, it is open to everyone, and the PDC roundtable in particular.
So do you get pledges around these 4 main areas that you just pointed out, or?
Exactly. We're asking for people. There's a pledging tool. I think it was on the slide, or you can Google it, and you basically, it's like a very, you go through a series of screens and you fill out your pledge and you select which focus area you're going to be focusing on and so forth. And I'll just mention, I didn't say in the slide, but after WTDC, we do want to play an active role in the coordination of implementation on some of those pledges in some of the countries. So we'll do that as a process that we're looking at how we can do that. So this isn't just a pledge and then we don't hear from you again, so to speak. We definitely want to have self-reporting and tracking on how the pledges are going, and even some hands-on coordination with some of those pledges.
So you're also establishing the pledging coordination mechanism, or somehow to follow up in later.
We are indeed, yeah. So happy to share. I think the DPG Alliance is starting a pledging effort. We actually met with the colleagues at UNHCR who ran the Global Refugee Forum, which did pledging, and UN Women, which ran the Global Equality or Generation Equality platform. So there seem to be a few of us that are starting to do these pledging activities. So the colleagues on Kate and your colleagues on DPG Alliance, as you guys start ramp up, I'm sure we can happy to share some lessons learned.
Yes, thank you. We are also going to, as Estonia, to make some pledges at the at the Digital Public Goods Alliance meeting next week, and perhaps also hopefully also in Kigali. So so thank you, Alex.
Very good.
If we are all good and nobody has any further questions, then I am really glad that David Rhew from Microsoft has joined us, and Microsoft also as a big player in digital public goods actually probably has also some comments on what we heard from Prashant and others, but mainly from the Microsoft sort of health line. So David, are you here, and are you ready?
I am here, and thank you all for inviting me. First of all, amazing discussion. I am always impressed with so many things that everyone's doing. A little background on myself and then on Microsoft. I am a physician, a healthcare technologist, a health services researcher. I've spent the past 25 years investigating how technology improves access to care, quality of care, patient safety, finding ways that we can improve efficiency in care, remove waste, and just improve the overall experience for everyone. As part of that, my journey has taken me through the worlds of electronic health records, where I was a co-principal of a company that basically built clinical decision support systems, then moved towards, I'd say, more of a consumer technology angle, working as chief medical officer at Samsung for 6 years, building technologies that were far more consumer friendly, technologies such as mobile phones, smartwatches, and other sensors. But for me, the big challenge was about the data, and the data ultimately not being something that we could bring together and make it more interoperable. Microsoft had a significant push in that area, and we met at several conferences, and I joined Microsoft 3 years ago and served as the global chief medical officer. My journey within Microsoft has really kind of taken two different paths, one of which is around the digital health angle, specifically looking at how healthcare can empower individuals and organizations to be able to achieve their goals. But we also saw during the pandemic opportunity where we could lean in and do a variety of different things. Now, when I was talking with Mei Lin, because there are so many different things that we have been doing, such as working with the World Health Organization to build out their data hub and presenting at the G7 summit on the work that we've done to date. Really exciting things that I think have an impact that may be of interest. Also looking more at the local level, working very closely with community-based organizations to deliver essential health services to the underserved through public-private partnerships. Those have been taking a significant amount of my time, but the area that Mei Lin said, well, why don't we, since we only have 20 minutes, or maybe now 15, just focus on patient or person-centered health records, because that also is an area that we've been spending a significant amount of time thinking about, moving from enterprise to empower individuals with their own health records. There's a significant amount of work around open source and open standards. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing through partnerships, and I'll highlight the partners that we've been working closely with, and hopefully they align with some of your goals. So with that said, let me jump to the slides here, and I'm going to share right now. All right. And I'll go to the slides. Okay, let's minimize this. All right, so this is a deck that I've combined two of our partners' stories, one of which is the Commons Project working in collaboration with a group called VCI, or Verifiable Credentials Initiative. These are both nonprofits working very closely across the globe on efforts to empower consumers with their own health information. The second part of this discussion will focus on work that we've been doing specifically on how do you secure that and make sure that that information is confidential. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So first, a little bit grounding in terms of what our objectives are. We have this belief that every individual needs to be empowered with access to their own health information. By having that access, they could then potentially share it with the organizations that they trust, and that will allow them to be able to see better care. And it will also open up a whole series of digital services that we may be able to create a new industry around. The reason why this is such an important issue and one that we need to fix is today the system is so complicated. This is just a typical example of all the different ways that data are communicated, oftentimes through single channels that are siloed between different organizations, obviously not leveraging the fact that we could potentially adopt common standards, open standards, APIs to be able to enable that. But at the center, it shouldn't just be institution sharing with other institution. It really needs to be around a person. And how do we then enable that? Well, let me describe some of the key principles of what we've been looking at. First of all, let's make sure that people can have both a paper or digital access to their health records. And I mentioned paper because we know that not everyone is digitally savvy, and sometimes paper is still the best option, but they need to have a similar experience. Secondly, the individuals need to have that information where they can then share that with healthcare organizations. So this is health information that they would have. It needs to be secured. The transactions need to be secured. The individuals need the tools to be able to access, and there needs to be agreements with these organizations that they will accept this information. So we're starting with the need to start with open standards. We need tools for individuals, we need tools for enterprise, and we need a verification process. And so I'm going to give you an example that started during the pandemic, which has now taken off, so to speak, caught on fire. And what I'm referring to is the fact that a significant amount of effort prior to the pandemic, at least here in the United States, has been around how individual or how organizations can standardize on a transport standard called HL7 FHIR, or Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. This standard is something that is now required by the law. It started with the 21st Century Cures Act, and then it went to CMS interoperability rules. We know now this is actually going to be the standard de facto that will be pushed out, not just by the government regulations, but it will be enforced so that electronic health record vendors that want to do service in the United States, hospitals, healthcare systems, payers, all have to adopt the standard. And that has a global impact because this means that any EHR vendor which has a global footprint has to enable this so that this occurs within their system. So technologically, the capabilities should need to be there. The Smart Health Card is essentially built off of the HL7 standard. It is a smaller subset of information that is captured, again, either on paper or email, and it can be captured and delivered on any device or technology of choice. In this case, we're going to talk about the smartphone. What we started with was the vaccination records, but we've now extended that to lab results, and it has health insurance information, patient summaries, and prescriptions. This is the type of information that an individual, when they receive a vaccination, can actually then receive through a QR code, which then they can scan, or another organization can scan, and they will be able to, in a secure manner and verifiable way, be able to identify a specific piece of information. And we saw the need because a lot of organizations wanted to know, have you been vaccinated? This also has relevance for kids going to schools that need to be vaccinated, or we'll call older kids as well in universities, adult immunizations, and a variety of other things we can think of. It's not just a U.S. issue and a new U.S. Opportunity. It actually has been adopted not only extensively in the United States, with 30 states fully adopting it, and then also over 800 health systems and leading pharmacies and technology platforms. But as you can see on the right-hand side, we have a significant number of countries that have adopted it. And just as recently, the whole coalition of African nations are just in the process now of adopting this as well. So you'll probably see this list expand pretty dramatically in the next couple of weeks. What we are doing is we're enabling through this platform. And again, I want to give credit to the Commons Project, as well as VCI and a whole coalition of partners, of which Microsoft is one of many. But what we've done is we actually helped develop the initial FHIR standard through the development work on our end. But this is something that's free. It's open source. It is something that we recognize everyone who has a smartphone, whether it be iOS or Android, can take advantage of this. And the record is then secured on their system. There needs to then also be a network of organizations that will accept this. And part of the reason why it's important for countries and states to be able to adopt this is it gives sort of the green light for these organizations that function within them to know that this is being adopted by the state immunizations or the national immunization registries, so that that information can then be brought together with the information that they may hold. You can see on this list, you've got healthcare providers, you've got lab companies, you've got insurance companies, you've got organizations that are dealing with healthcare, but are perhaps maybe in the retail space, as well as a whole bunch of states, all being now with that information being brought onto this platform. And these are very consumer-friendly tools. I think if you've ever seen Apple HealthKit or you've seen Common Health, these are tools on either platform, and it can be very easily used. Now, again, as I mentioned before, it can also be used for folks that don't have a smartphone or don't want to use their smartphone for this. It could be just on a piece of paper, just like we do today. Now, the difference between that and what we have today is that the information, when you scan it, is verified. So we know actually that you can't forge the actual transcript of whatever information you're trying to say, whether it's a vaccination record or your health record, because there's a process of verification to make sure that that is actually coming from the trusted source. That's one aspect. And so I'm going to leave it as sort of, we'll call it opportunity one. I want to also now talk about this concept of how data gets exchanged, and perhaps maybe there's an opportunity for us to secure that data even further. So again, on the left-hand side, this is how it's done. It's done oftentimes in enterprise environments with highly secure processes. Consumers, though, however, once they gain access to this, you have to keep in mind, at least within the United States, we have something called HIPAA that no longer applies once the consumer has access to their health record. So we need to start thinking about ways that we can secure that information and help that consumer. So I'm going to describe one of the opportunities potentially to leverage blockchain. And I think several of you are familiar with blockchain as a distributed ledger, has a timestamp, it's encryption. In the context of healthcare data, we start on the left-hand side, you've got individuals that have access to all this information. It's through data encryption and we'll call it a smart contract. They can put this into a blockchain environment. It has both personal identifiable information as well as non-identifiable information. So it's kind of a combination of both. You'll see that organizations that have access or need to have access to that identifiable will have an authentication process and a smart contract. But there will also be organizations that will have a smart contract that will put in de-identified patient data. This is an opportunity where we might be able to leverage blockchain to help secure that transactional piece, allows data to stay where it's at, as well as potentially in an area that only individuals with a smart key can access. And now what you think of in terms of how we are starting to leverage that with that process, which I talked about before with smart health cards, you've got issuers who are issuing the certificate. So in the case of vaccinations, it was oftentimes the country or the state immunization registry. You've got the holder or the individual that actually has access to it. But in addition, there's a digital or paper version of that. And then there's a verifier. And that's the process that oftentimes requires. Now that could then, if we think about there being a decentralized identifier and verifier or credentials, we may also be able to then pull in a process where we could have a policy enforcement point and then leverage confidential compute and Active Directories around this. So there's a combination of technologies that we are now starting to see play into this. Certainly, we know that mobile phones and technologies will be a part of this. We're seeing blockchain as being a part of it, and at the center, open standards such as FHIR or fast healthcare interoperability resources. So I have flied through that as quickly as possible because I know that there might be some questions, comments, thoughts, and I'll open it up to the floor to see what your thoughts are.
This is Maylin. David, you really did fly through this, but the overriding impression I have is, wow, the private sector is doing a whole lot of stuff. And how can we have bridges to what we heard earlier from the digital public goods work? I mean, this stuff is happening in two separate silos. Do you see any hope for how this could converge? And I'm really sorry that Kate Wilson has left, but I'm definitely going to send the recording to her for what you say. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that this ties back into a variety of different things that were discussed earlier, this whole concept of business model, who's going to pay for it? And what we found is that, and this is just, through the pandemic, we've seen that there was a need for us to invest our time and resources into underserved communities. And we struggle today, now that things are sort of reverting back into a little bit more of a business as usual environment, to find those funding sources for these type of areas. So I feel that that's a core issue of how we need to start figuring out how do we create a win-win situation for both the public and the private to be able to create something that is justifiable, is usable, and is something that can be highly valuable. What I shared, a lot of that is actually open source and available. It's adoption. This is the reason why a lot of the countries are looking at. We're not talking about a significant amount of investment from a country or a state into these, adopting open standards, adopting FHIR, things of that, smart health cards. That is, I'd say, a very easy win. But what it's doing is it's opening up also, I'll call it, a whole suite of digital business opportunities that the private sector can then start leaning in and building off, so that if organizations and individuals want to continue to leverage those open standards and be able to have a sustainable business, because there's a higher need. So like in the case of security, where perhaps blockchain you don't need to do that for everybody, but in certain cases, you might want to have that for certain types of data or certain types of procedures, then yes, it would make a lot of sense and there would be a huge value. So I think we have to, start with, the free and the public and the open, and figure out how can we then, using those standards, build a new digital ecosystem.
So I'm just going to take this chance to give a quick update, because I was just at the Think 7 Summit, which is the policy briefing for the German G7 presidency. And there was complete alignment on the need for this public infrastructure for health as coming out of it. So my deepest hope is, out of the G7 meetings and the G20 meetings, we will end up with some initiative at the global level that will help to bring this public and private together. But now I see that Dorothy has some statements, and so let me back off.
Dorothy, would you like to step in?
I had actually, thank you, Chair. I had actually put the question in the chat. I really like what you presented, but I was trying to see what it would imply for a health system in a country where they're struggling even to get the basic drugs to the population. Already we are seeing that large amounts of health budget are going to technical elements, platforms supporting health. So I was asking what additional cost per patient we're looking at. How are we going to project that? Because obviously businesses are getting involved with this so that they can thrive and survive. Also, if you are not literate, and there's a huge portion of the world which is not literate at all in any language, and if you can't function well in the official language, how are you going to really manage your data? I think it's core to many of the things we talk about. And so it's as if we're talking for one part of the world and deepening that divide.
Yeah, great questions. And so maybe I'll start with the example of the efforts that have been undergone around smart health cards. The purpose for smart health cards was to add no cost to the patient or the consumer. So there's no cost, everything's free. They are given an option to be able to either get a paper version of the record that says, hey, you just got vaccinated on this date, or QR code. Actually, it's both, to tell you the truth. It's actually the record with the QR code. Now, the thing is, they can have the QR code also digitally uploaded onto their smartphone. So those are the options. Now, what they do with that is up to them. If they choose not to use it at all, that's not a problem. If they want to then take full advantage of that and go to places that recognize it, they can now take full advantage of that. And the goal is, if there is an ecosystem where all that information is understandable by the hospitals, the health centers. So let's say that they're driving home and they get involved into a car accident, and now they need to be rushed to the hospital. And this is some place that they've never been to. They have no records. They know nothing about them. They could immediately scan the QR code, and they would be able to have access to the records at the person's consent. It gives us the ability for patients to be empowered with their own health records and for them to decide if and when they want to share it. There is no cost to the patient. The cost is in really the time and effort that organizations need to say, we're going to adopt this, so we're going to accept this as a standard that we can ingest, and so that we will be willing to share. And that is what the reason why this is more of a policy decision around, how are we going to adopt a single standard that allows us to be able to share data that allows consumers to be in charge of their health. So I think it's very important that we separate the two. No cost to the patient, consumer, person, but there is a time, effort, and an agreement that we need to standardize on these standards, which are actually now global standards, and that we will build the systems that support that interoperability.
I think I phrased my question in such a way that you answered this way, so please pardon me, because I was really thinking about a Ministry of Health's budget. That's why I referred to the difficulty in getting basic drugs to the population. There's no way you can issue smart cards without a budgetary implication for the Ministry of Health. So there's an opportunity cost to doing that. You will stop providing some antibiotic somewhere or some snake venom antidote somewhere because you're spending on this. So there's an opportunity cost, and the Ministry of Health has to calculate the cost per patient to be able to see how they're going to deliver. So that's where I was coming from.
Yep, and I think that one of the objectives for, I'll use VCI as an example, that initiative, they have actually enabled sharing, open sharing of the code that allows for states and other organizations to be able to read those smart health cards. So my recommendation would be learn more about what we can do as a broader coalition and how we can share this information, because there is a desire to make this as low cost as possible, and it really is about data sharing and sharing of best practices and things of that sort. Right now, as I mentioned before, this has already been reviewed and soon to be endorsed and approved by a large number of LMICs in the African continent. So this is actually, they having gone through that vetting process, they have seen that the risk benefits far away in favor this type of effort. It is not, there's no charge to join this, no charge to it's more about saying that we will adopt this as a standard that will allow for consumers to be able to take advantage of this. Now, some organizations, some places have mandated that they need to use these type of standards. I think that would probably go to that next level, but I think what they're saying is that we can allow for this to be something that
we should meet up. I should give you another chance to try to beat me.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
I think it was an accident.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And I can put in the link for VCI if there's further information or that you'd like to gather on this, because I feel that you'll see in my short little period of description, I've skimmed the surface of all the details behind I think the way that organizations would want to consider this as a viable option. And you'll see that given the fact that many states and countries have adopted this, it is not a big lift. A lot of them are, not extremely wealthy countries. This is really about open standards, interoperability, and consumer-empowered healthcare.
Thank you, David. I would have many questions here because this is the open standards, of course, and the interoperability and all the nice things we want to have are quite hot topics and are high in the agenda. For example, in the European Union, where we are really talking about cross-border services and the exchange of data, including health data, even though this is perhaps slightly trickier, but indeed, due to this increased mobilization, it is actually needed. That if I get to a hospital in Rome, they know they get an access to some of my crucial data, for example. So I would have many questions, but I'm sure we can also continue this discussion at some point in the future. So thank you, David, very much for joining us and for Mei-Lin for making it all happen as always. But we have in other important policy area representative also here to talk about the education. Peter, I understand you will make an intro today, and then we will have a more substantial discussion in some later sessions. But thank you, David, for health, and Peter. Now is the time for education.
Yes, I'll very shortly intro, and then fortunately I already wrote in the chat that I'm leaving. So I was asked to talk about the kind of European digital education and the coming digital education hub that is being built by the European Commission. And my organization is part of a consortium that is supporting this work. But on top of this, of course, as might have been visible in the chat just a moment ago, we also work with UNESCO and other organizations across this field. The hub is about to be launched, so it's not yet launched, and that is maybe why it's also relevant to talk about it at the next phase, because as a contractor to the Commission, of course, we're just supporting this process and we cannot officially launch anything. But it's about building a community of practice and bringing together all of these different education projects and initiatives that we have in Europe. And the hub is not only for Europe, it's kind of open to the world. So this first phase is building a community of practice here, but then to stretch out across the world as well. And it's all digital education. So basically all education, all levels, all sectors. And my organization, we're in charge of the acceleration and testing part. And we work a little bit differently than most accelerators and testing. So we look at process, we look at maturity, responsibility of teams, and things like this. And then as a result, impact. So not necessarily euros for edtech companies, but what kind of impact can we do in education, and how can we work from that aspect. But I think maybe that is enough as a short introduction, and then in the next meeting we can dive deeper into these different kind of networks and different initiatives that is now being launched. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very much looking forward. Also, because education is also quite a big part in the open space, and also in the microservices approach that has also been sort of taken further or promoted quite a bit in the recent years. So maybe we can have a good discussion next time around education and sort of the EduStack and all these different initiatives, and also about the hub and how it connects. So thank you very much, Peter, and see you soon. But for now we have Stephen Ozoigbo, and I hope I pronounced it well.
Yes,
from
you did.
ARM. So please, Stephen, tell us about yourself and
Yes, you did pronounce it correctly. I would, yeah, I wouldn't request a redo on my last name, because if you did, you would probably say it a different way every single time. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. I hope you all can hear me correctly. My name is Stephen Ozoigbo, and I lead the emerging markets business at ARM. For those of you who do not know what ARM is, sorry, my camera wasn't on there. ARM is a leading IP company for the semiconductor industry in the world, and we have over billions of chips put out across the devices that we're all using now. Some of the devices in your homes, in your offices, the data center architecture, and even the Fugaku supercomputer in Japan is running on ARM. So from an infrastructure level, it's everything from your endpoint mobile device, your IoT devices, your edge devices, data center technology, high performance compute technology, and even the hyperscale cloud technologies. AWS, the big mighty AWS is running on an ARM chip called Graviton. So I come to you today as a friend of the group. Thank you to the leadership of the PCI for the invitation. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you, Mylin, for decades of friendship. And I've always been a big fan of this group, the intelligence, the camaraderie, the community being shared here. So it is an inspiration and an honor to speak to you for just a few minutes today about some of the work we're doing with a focus on sustainability and the emerging markets. The conversations around sustainability are not new to this group, but certainly I want to speak to give you a lens of what ARM is doing. My focus area when I speak about the emerging markets are Africa and South America specifically, so from a geo standpoint. And I will walk you through at a high level some of the things we've done, and I'll open up conversations to carry on after this, knowing that, of course, there might be folks on this call who would be so interested in further conversations. Yeah. So from an ARM standpoint, we have an ambition, a vision, and a mission towards sparking the world's potential. And to do so sustainably, we are committed towards actions that center around decarbonizing compute and certainly closing the digital divide. As I mentioned, being the IP behind the instruction sets that drive the system on chip, chip production, OEM, ODM relationships, when we talk about decarbonizing compute, we're talking about the ecosystems that we serve, our ecosystems of customers, our ecosystems of partners, and sometimes even our competitive ecosystems. Our responsibility towards making sure that our products, our end products, our software and hardware life cycles, and even to some cases, the end of life activities of our products do not harm our environment, are all part of what we've placed under the decarbonized compute strategy. More importantly, as ARM, our core value proposition is looking at low power compute environments and energy efficient environments, whereby at design stage, Mylin's famous two-word phrase of sustainable design, right, comes into play as ARM, because we are very, very much targeted at making sure that the life cycle of our products, from design to end user capabilities, all look at making sure that we are not adding to the carbon footprint, and in some cases we are removing from it in the way that we look at power efficiency, compute efficiency, and end of life cycles. And when we do this and we do it, yes.
Stephen, could you move to slideshow mode? For us, there is a big black thing about crossing your slides. And so.
Oh, sorry about that. Is this better?
Actually, the black thing is still there for us. I don't know. Anyway, just keep going. It is better.
Okay. Yeah, so we've done this, and the digital divide conversation is one that many folks here are not new to, but as ARM, again, as part of our ecosystem, it's important to us that we continue to support processes, initiatives, technologies, and products that look at supporting the digital divide activities and strategies. So even with ecosystem trends like Google, AWS, Meta, there are quite a number of things we've done in this space. But for us to do these two things and to satisfy and execute these two strategies, we must support a legion of global problem solvers, and also we must accelerate the development, utilization, and efficacy of responsible technology. And in that regard, ARM has invested extensively in an education program called ARM Education. It's a business unit in itself. And certainly from an individual's perspective, we are part of a global network that has seen us select a group of thought leaders, decision makers, and even tech enthusiasts as part of the ARM Innovator Program. Within the Responsible Technology Manifesto, we are looking at security, AI trust, and the coalition around, authentic and provenance of information. So these 3 points here, all within sustainable.arm.com, will allow you to see how we've come together to ensure that the strategy is not just one that looks pretty on paper, but the execution of it actually touches all the different parts of our ecosystem. So this is what it looks at the top level. From an SDG standpoint, my role in emerging markets and the way I operate around ecosystems within Africa and South America really touches on 5 of the SDGs with a focus on quality education. Like I mentioned, with ARM Education, we're educating developers, we're educating K-12 learners, we're educating teachers. We're bridging the divide on the 4th Industrial Revolution within these countries to ensure that universities, institutions, governments, and even end users, startups and developers all have access to ARM's unique curriculum. And all of this is free on GitHub. So you're not looking at anything that's licensed or paywall, protected. You're actually seeing a lot of our multi-million-dollar licenses given freely in education platforms where the partners are universities, the partners are developer groups, the partner are government innovation agencies, primary schools, secondary schools, high schools, after-school programs, and the likes. I will go through each one of these, but in the interest of time, I just want to touch on the fact that, of course, with climate action, very clear activities with industry and infrastructure, a lot of activities we're doing there in smart cities, making sure that we are really pioneering the 4th Industrial Revolution conversations. And to my earlier point, ensuring sustainable design from IP to end product. And then, of course, building these sustainable cities and communities in ways that support not just our vision in first world markets, but our vision in emerging markets where these activities are most critical. And all of these fall under the ARM Engage brand that I lead. And the Engage acronym here, the superscript E is engage in emerging economies on a triple E. And then the N, the GAGE being the networks, the globalization, the amplification, of course, and then making sure that we can educate all stakeholders while we build sustainable businesses. And this is important for us because we have been able to see how the last SDG there, which is the partnerships goal, has worked. Right here in this group, I'm always pleased when I hear from a Doreen or when I hear from a Mylin about ITU coming to be part here, because we are part of the ITU and we're doing so in ways that allow for these local ecosystems to thrive. So one example is our lab in a box model, which now sees us with our first ecosystem lab in South Africa, and we'll see an expansion of this across Africa and indeed across South America over the next coming months and years. And we're doing this to ensure that we amplify our visibility, we educate the stakeholders, and then we execute sustainability programs in partnership with governments, with industry, and with general developer communities, including startups. If I may, because we had the ITU present here, I will take a moment to point out our partnership with ITU and point out how, as ARM, even being an IP company, our relationship with consortia like the ITU has led us to be partners within AI for Good, where we are supporting a bevy of activities that start off with us having the ethical and responsible technology mandate, but also lead into us being able to be sure that our commercial opportunities do offer that back loop towards trust, towards ethic, towards security, all coming together under a fantastic ITU platform called AI for Good. So if you don't know about AI for Good, please check it out and you'll see daily, weekly, monthly activities across a bevy of partners, all speaking towards the effect of AI in our communities. And then certainly we have been part of the early pledges into the Partner to Connect initiative with the ITU, where we have then raised our hands to say that our lab in a box model, this model that allows us bring together the ARM ecosystem, set up these developer labs, set up these ecosystem labs, bring together governmental partners, industry partners that will allow us then ensure that the Partner to Connect vision is driven through our networks, is one that we're also very proud of and speaks towards our larger sustainability programs and allows us to talk to audiences like this to carry you along. We're doing this in light of the ARM ecosystem. As you know, ARM does not produce any physical products. Our IP is driving a lot of physical products and driving a lot of technology initiatives. So we see it as our responsibility to support the likes of ITU and ensure that we can do this and do it scalably. So as I wrap up here, I want to mention that this lab in a box model is one that I'm presenting to this group as part of our sustainability initiative, but I'm also allowing you to reflect on the fact that we want to have conversations with anyone on this call who is so interested in not just supporting this, but being a part of it as we drive it through. As our vision towards, adding value everywhere that compute happens includes the emerging markets, from Lagos, Brazil to Lagos, Nigeria, from the Caribbeans to South Africa, from Tunisia to Colombia, from Chile to Kenya. These are all areas that my mandate does see to make sure that we influence our partners to come in and we do so sustainably. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, Mei Lin and the team. And I'm so thrilled to be here and I look forward to doing more with this community in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a quite tight timing, but I would still like to ask if somebody would like to actually ask about such an interesting and I would say also a cool initiative. So I would maybe quickly ask more of this propagandistic question, and I'm just wondering which of your sorts of courses or which of these kits are your most popular ones, if I understood it correctly.
Absolutely. So within the lab in a box model, we are currently set up in South Africa, in the automotive capital of South Africa. For those who don't know, South Africa is the automotive capital of Africa. And so our lab is 5 minutes from the Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, BMW plants that manufacture all the cars in Africa that are new, of course. And we're also at the hub of all the universities in the Eastern Cape region. We are partnered with the CSIR, which is the government's Center for Innovation and Research. And we are also ensuring that all of their work is funneling through the lab. But most importantly is we're not alone. AWS, Google, Meta, the likes of Arduino, Spark Fund, the likes of Acrano, the Linux Foundation, these are all partners that are with us in these lab environments and offering a bevy of resources, all for free, by the way. So none of this is a commercial angle. None of this involves an ARM license that involves royalties. These are all part of our initiatives into empowering those communities, putting tools where they're needed, supporting the 5 stakeholders, the governmental stakeholders, the industry stakeholders, the institutional stakeholders, the startups, and then certainly the young learners. Most recently, you will see in the press a company called Microbit, which is an ARM-backed company for microcontrollers, has recently signed with the South African government for basic education, sponsored by the British Council, to train 12,000 students with ARM microbits. And this is just one of many initiatives, which starts off from the young learners and goes all the way to the hyperscalers like AWS. So I can take a lot of time in that, but certainly I see a question here about the K-12 elaboration. Yeah, so I can send you more info on that. I will put some stuff in the chat room, but Joseph, and also reach to you offline, because our K-12 programs are actually one of the most supported, right, within the lab environment. And because we have a bevy of partners there, we are finding that in many cases, as I just mentioned with Microbit, the same with Arduino, we are home to Arduino's first Inspiration Lab. If you look up Arduino Inspiration Lab, you'll see that they have labs in Colombia, they have labs in Belgium. We are the first one in Africa. And all of the kits that are coming from Arduino through us, all of those are ARM-powered kits. We are training teachers, we're training educators, we're training educational and administrators, and we're supporting after-school programs for these kids in the lab, robotics programs, coding programs, you name it. They're running competitions across Africa as we speak with something called the Do Your Bit Challenge. So you look up the Do Your Bit Challenge on Microbit, and then you'll see it. But more information on this, Joseph, sorry, I will be sending to you as well, and anybody else who is so interested.
Thank you. I believe we would all be interested in this great work you are doing. So we will send later if you send to us, to everybody. So thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you for making it. So we have exactly 11 minutes. So Bhaskar, I hope you have also joined us too. Yes, thank you. So we have 11 minutes until the end. I won't take much to close. So almost the rest of our time today is yours. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nele. I apologize for the noise in the background. I'm in the middle of travel, so it's been a little challenging, squeezing in the time. So what I will do is I will, as long as people can hear me, I will provide a 5-minute update so that I'll give you 5 minutes back. And perhaps in your next meeting, I could give you a little bit more details on some of the work that we're doing, if that's okay. Because I was planning on actually leaving at right around this time, because that was based on the original agenda. Is that okay, Nele?
Yes. Thank you. And we had so many discussions, so I'm sorry for little change in the time. I hope you don't miss a plane or anything. Then run.
I appreciate your everyone's patience and flexibility. So I just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the work that we're doing at Digital Planet at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. So I wanted to share sort of 3 things that we have just completed in the last several months. One is an index of digital inclusion across 90 countries around the world. So we have been studying these 90 countries in terms of their state of digital evolution, how quickly they are transitioning from a physical past to a digital future. And now the question that we interrogated was, how evenly spread, how equitable is the access to the digital environment across these 90 countries. And we looked at this question across 3 different fault lines. And one fault line is gender, a second fault line is socioeconomic class, and the third is the rural-urban divide. I will send Nele, if that's okay, the links to the results. It's quite fascinating to just see the disparities across countries and also the disparities across these fault lines. For instance, the Philippines scores very high in terms of digital inclusion by gender, but scores very low in terms of digital inclusion by socioeconomic class. So it's really interesting to explore the question of what's going on and what socioeconomic phenomenon is that shining a light on. We are also going to be, over the course of the summer, as new data comes out, be creating a new version of this index, which will give us a sense of how digital inclusion itself has shifted over the course of the 2 years of the pandemic, because the 2 years of the pandemic, as we all know, has been quite a significant transition in terms of embrace of digital technology. Certainly digital payments around the world has really picked up in ways that we had never seen before. So we are actively studying that phenomenon as I speak. A second piece of research is a new body of work that we have just launched called Digital Pulse. And here, what we are doing is we are tracking the responses over social media to major breaking world events. So we tracked the reaction of citizens around the world as their countries locked down, and we basically tried to see how the responses over social media could be distributed across different sentiments, such as happiness, anger, sadness, disgust, and so on and so forth. So essentially, it's an emotional analysis of social media. So an interesting piece of analysis that I just wanted to share with you was we looked at the response of the Twitter community to the Elon Musk takeover saga. And there's some really interesting sentiments that we analyzed through 4.5 million tweets that we studied that commented on the Elon Musk takeover. So the initial responses were actually highly positive. And this is true, we could break it down by country, like the United States and the United Kingdom, or India and Nigeria as examples of global South and global North countries. And what we found was there was a global uniformly positive response to the initial comments by Elon Musk about asking the question, should Twitter be reorganized? And is Twitter really the platform for promoting democracy and free speech? When he announced his 9% stake, that emotional response went very, very positive. And then when he announced his complete takeover of the company, it all turned negative. So it's fascinating to see the emotional roller coaster of the Twitter community itself as they responded to a very prominent, significant person taking over the company. So we also looked at the response over social media to other breaking events, such as the leak of the Roe v. Wade document, or in the recent weeks. And again, what we found was, at least as far as Twitter was concerned, completely negative response to the announcement that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And this negativity was reflected across genders and across every state in the United States, including the red and the blue states. So it's very interesting, which suggests that Twitter is a significantly left-leaning community relative to the rest of the country. So that's update number 2. I have so many other updates to share. I will just give you one more, which is we have been studying how the infrastructure bill, which is now the Infrastructure Act, which has allocated $65 billion to close the digital divide in the United States, how that money is going to be spent and likely to be spent. And what we find is that the likely outcome of the spending of that money is going to focus on covering more miles, as in covering more people with fiber optic connectivity. And our recommendation to the administration is that we should switch that priority to covering more people. So cover more people than cover more miles should be the policy objective, which currently is not the case. And if you were to allocate that money towards covering more people, you would be spending much more money on subsidizing low-income households in the congested urban areas rather than laying fiber optic cable in the rural areas. So again, a lot of details behind that. Happy to share the background on it. But I just thought I'd just skim the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the research work coming out of Digital Planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhaskar. It's super fascinating, and we haven't in our network actually so much talked about the end user and actually the people to whom we are in principle working for, if we can put it that way. So it's very nice to hear actually from what the people think, how they react, how they behave. So thank you very, very much for this work. It seems we often forget about them. So I'm definitely very much interested to know more about the research, and I'm sure everybody here in the group is. We are soon closing, but I was wondering if anybody wants to add something here. And I don't know, Bhaskar, when exactly you have to leave, so maybe we can give somebody a good chance to ask you about the research you just.
So I think there was a question.
Dorothy.
There was a question from Dorothy about how we.
You know, that was just thrilling to listen to. Such an excellent summary of your work, and I can't imagine being able to do this in a public setting as you must be at the moment. So congratulations on that. You may know I am currently the chair of UNESCO's Information for All program, which is supposed to be dedicated to inclusive and equitable knowledge societies. So I am very curious about your index and its methodology. And I'm wondering if we have other institutions around the world that are focusing exclusively on inclusion. And if you could clarify that for me, because it's a very contentious area, one could say, difficult to get people to agree on what inclusion means. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question, Dorothy. And I think just given the limitations of time, what I would do is I will send you the link to our work, which will give you more details as to how we capture the notion of inclusion. As I mentioned, we look at inclusion across 3 different fault lines. One is gender. And by gender, we try to essentially compute the percentage of women who have access to a variety of digital services, starting from foundational internet access to digital payments and a variety of other applications sitting on top of that. And then we ask the same question by socioeconomic class, which is we look at the difference between the top 30% and the bottom 30% in terms of income levels in any given country. And the third is looking at the same question by rural and urban coverage of digital access and usage of digital applications. I can send you the detailed methodology, and very happy to follow up with you on any questions that might come up. In terms of other organizations that are studying similar things, one notable one is the EIU, which is funded by Facebook. So they have an inclusive internet index where they also cover multiple countries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhaskar. We are exactly on time. I would like to thank everybody. It was, for me, a fascinating session. So thank you, May-Lin, for all the work and everybody for contributing. And we have quite a bit of follow-up to do, actually, from this session to the next one. So I'm very much looking forward, but also to updating about the results around digital cooperation and in different networks and quite globally. So thank you so much, and see you in a month. Thank you.